Welcome back to Shattering Myths. The reason that we focus on the news in the first hour is to give everyone who is listening to this program the opportunity to realize that politics and religion are disingenuous, that they're hypocritical, that they are not part of the solution. They are not our friend. They are not doing something that we ought to trust and rely upon. That they are indeed the problem. Is why I say that rearranging the deck chairs on the ship of state is not going to make any difference. The rate to which the Western nations are sinking is not going to be slowed because we changed the fabric on the chairs on the deck of this ship. The reality is that human institutions have always been corrupt. They continue to be corrupt. The only thing that has changed is the consequence of that corruption. Individually, it's always been the same. The mass perpetrators of religion and politics, economic schemes, and military invasions have always had their way with most people because most people are just caught in the fray. They go along with the tide. They go with the flow. The price that is to be paid for standing up against the current is so high, most are unwilling to do it. Most don't even give it a second thought. And so most people are just swept away in the mass hysteria that follows the indoctrination and the corruption of people through religion and politics, militarism, and economic schemes. But there are a few, always have been, always will be, who are willing to say, no, it's obvious where this is going and it isn't good. And I'm not going to be allied patriotically, politically, religiously, with any of these institutions that are leading so many astray. Because I've taken the time to consider what they have to say, and what they have to say is errant, contradictory, impossible. You know, if you consider the platitudes of Christianity and you compare them against what the God they claim inspired their Bible had to say, what you find is that there's a 0% chance that Christianity can be trustworthy. It contradicts what Yahowah, the God whose name they don't even know, has proclaimed in his Torah, prophets, and Psalms in virtually every conceivable way. God spent considerable time telling us that the man known as Paul, but named Shaul, would be the kiss of death, and yet Christians lap up his poison as if it were candy. If you're informed and you know what God had to say, that the first requirement of participating in his covenant is to walk away from religion and politics, from the corruption of Babylon, you realize that it's impossible to be religious, to be a Christian, to be religiously Jewish, into Judaism, which is really arguments based on the Talmud, Muslim, or socialist secular humanist, and expect any reciprocity from God. If you have chosen an adulterous affair with a false god through those religions, you are not welcome in his family. He does not know you. You do not know him. And that's why we focus the first hour on shattering those myths, so that you know that the President of the United States is lying, that the man who claimed to have made the world more stable has actually brought it within a hair's breadth of utter destruction. But there is one individual who can be trusted, one individual who can be relied upon. He happens to be the creator God of the universe. He provided his testimony to us, introducing himself to us by name, telling us exactly who he is and what he wants, what he is like, detailing a relationship agreement with us that we can choose to participate in or reject, making promises to us as to how he's going to resolve the issues that ail us, which are invitations, which we also can answer or pretend as if they never existed. And that is why we turn in our second hour to what he had to say. Because It is obvious that man's institutions provide no hope. There is no hope politically, religiously, economically, militaristically. But there is hope in Yahowah's Torah guidance. We were considering the statement in Bereshith, the opening book of the Torah, 2:25, when Yahowah said the man and his wife, were naked and yet they were not ashamed. So it begs the question, when did we become ashamed? When did we bring shame into our world? Well, Yahowah talks about that shame that we brought into our world in the book named Salvation, and we read from it in our program yesterday. Yahowah explained, let her, speaking of Yisrael, those are individuals who engaged in endure with God, turn away from illicit relationships with false deities, from her presence and the marks of unfaithfulness, of adultery, from beneath, between her breasts. And I will not love her children, for they are the children of prostitution, of adultery, of idolatry. For their mother wantonly committed adultery and idolatry. She who conceived them made a serious mistake. God speaks out against adultery for a reason. It reaches the model of the monogamous, loving, covenant family. God's idea of a perfect relationship is a monogamous relationship between he and his creation and him. There's no other gods allowed in this relationship. The first statement that God etched in stone says, you will not exist with any other gods in my presence. You can't be expected to enter heaven with the Lord Jesus Christ, with an Allah, with man at the center of the universe. God says no. And the problem here is that the children of idolatry, the children of religion, are as idolatrous and as religious as their parents. I did receive a letter yesterday from a woman who's a new member of Yah's covenant family. And she says, what about our young children? And what's going to happen when Yah pulls his family away from the earth just prior to the tribulation? God does have a caveat for that. The young children of his covenant are considered to bear the signature of the covenant and therefore are adopted into Yah's family. And so when we are children of the covenant and we bear children, before those children reach a time where they can choose for themselves, it is their parents' choices that influence their lives. They're spared. God says, I will not love her children because they are the children of religion. Their mother wantonly committed religious adultery. She made a horrible mistake. Then God tells us, and this is some of the most powerful words in the whole of his Torah and prophets, my people are destroyed and they will perish as a result of their lack of knowledge and as a result of corrupted information. Again, there's a reason that we divide this program into 2 hours, with the first hour focusing on the corruption that has entered our world as a result of religion and politics, of militarism and jaundiced economic schemes. If you're not aware that human institutions are not trustworthy, they are not reliable, and that God, for that reason, wants you to disassociate from them, then you're not equipped to clear your mind of those delusions so that you're open to his teaching. And we spend the second hour studying his Torah teaching, his guidance, because we know that without that, we are destroyed. It is the only means to salvaging our soul. Because souls that don't avail themselves of what the Torah provides in terms of guidance relative to knowing Yahowah, relative to the covenant relationship that he's offering in its terms and conditions, and his invitations to become perfect, immortal, and empowered and enriched children of his family, are found only in the Torah. If you choose to ignore that information, as God says, my people are destroyed and will perish as a result of a lack of knowledge and because of corrupted information. Indeed, because you have rejected and avoided understanding, I will reject and avoid you, serving with me as my ministers. And since you have ignored and forgotten the Almighty's Torah, I will cease to care about, and I will also forget your children. It is something that we are not told, and we don't bother to consider, that God has made it absolutely clear, undeniably, irrefutably clear, that if you do not accept his Torah guidance, and his Torah's guidance introduces us to God, presents the terms and conditions of the covenant as well as its benefits, and the means to avoid our mortal demise through the invitations. If you don't consider the heart and the soul of the Torah and God's opportunities for us to live with him, then you have no chance of understanding who he is, what he's offering. You have no chance of exercising free will in a rational and appropriate way. And if you reject the Torah, as Pauline Christians do, Paul went to war against the Torah, and so Christians ignore it. In fact, they hate it. And because of that, their children are unknown to God, just as their children do not know God. So then, as they became more numerous and influential, they continued to sin and rebel against me. Therefore, I will substitute their glory for disgrace. This is a comment that Yahowah also makes of Shaul, of Paul. In Habakkuk, he specifically tells us that Shaul is the plague of death, that those who accept what he has to say will find no satisfaction. And he concludes that testimony by speaking of Shaul and his satanic partner as being the beasts, the demonic beasts that he will destroy. And he tells us that exactly this, that the status and glory that Paul sought for himself, that Satan sought for himself, will be substituted for disgrace, for shame, for scorn. And it is really the choice that so many religious people have made. In fact, all of those who have chosen to be religious instead of engaging in the relationship have made this same decision. We have distanced ourselves from God. We have done so primarily through the corruption of religion. We've also done so through national politics and patriotism. But collectively, mankind as a whole has distanced themselves from God. It's the reason that God, on 2 occasions, told us that very few people find his doorway to life. Very few people capitalize on his merciful offer. And the tablets that he etched in stone in the second of the 3 statements that he made on the first tablet, he concluded that statement by saying that thousands will avail themselves of my mercy. He's speaking in first person, by closely examining and carefully considering the terms and conditions of my covenant. Thousands amongst billions is 1 in a million. Yahowah echoed that same statement when he said very few will find the doorway to life, which is Passover, and most will, the vast preponderance of people, most will find nothing but death and destruction of their souls upon their earthly demise. Now, understand that death and destruction of a soul is not a punishment. It simply means that the individual had their mortal life. They had the opportunity to express free will, and they were given the gift of the nasama, which is our conscience, the ability to discern right from wrong, and that the vast preponderance of people simply squandered those gifts, and they are temporal. They come to an end. God doesn't extinguish their souls. They just cease to exist. Separated from the source of life, there is only death. And that's why Yahowah said they most find death and destruction. Their souls cease to live. They cease to exist. It's not a punishment. It's simply an end of life. Very few avail themselves of God's testimony, but God did present the way. As we continue to study what he revealed in the book named Salvation, here is Salvation 6, 1 and 2. We read these words, "Let's start walking, and let us return to Yahowah. For indeed, he has torn us, but he will heal us." What does that mean? Well, first of all, God presents everything in relationship to him as walking. God wants us to walk to him, walk with him. And the reason he chose to walk, it's halak in Hebrew, is because when you're walking, you're on your feet. You're not down on your knees groveling in a worshipful position. When you're walking, you're shoulder to shoulder, side by side. When you're walking, you're engaged. You're doing stuff together. You're moving. You're exploring. You're acting. God's not interested in a bump on the log that just sits there and does nothing. He wants an engaged relationship where we are side by side, on our feet. That's why in his name, 2 of the 4 letters that comprise his name show people standing up, walking, pointing up, looking up, reaching up to him. So let's start walking. Walking, and which direction do we want to walk? Well, mankind has walked away from God, so let's start walking and let's return to Yahowah. Now, how did he tear us? Well, we were conceived to live with God in a protective enclosure conducive to life of great joy. But we sadly chose to ignore his instructions, and as a result, we were torn from the garden. And collectively, mankind ever since that time has perpetrated all manner of political and religious myths to tear up the covenant for all practical purposes. And God has said here specifically, because we have become so religious and idolatrous, that he was required to divorce himself of us. That's collectively. As individually, we can all choose to accept his remedy, and he will heal us. He has stricken us, but he will repair us. He says he has caused us to be destroyed, and yet he will wrap himself around us as if a bandage, healing the wound. After 2 days, he will revive us, and in the 3rd day, he will raise us up, establishing us upright, and we shall live in his presence. What is the 2 days? Well, God provided the healing 700 years after Hosea wrote these words, after he lived these words, on Mount Moriah, fulfilling Pesach, Matzah, Bakurim, and Shavuah. In year 33 CE, which was year 4000, and 2,000 years later, 2 days later, he's going to raise his people up. Yisrael, establishing us upright, and we will live in his presence. He's talking about what's going to happen in the celebration of the millennial celebration of Sukkah. We'll return to that thought in a moment. Welcome back to Shattering Myths. This is an interesting bit of information that God gives us. He's speaking to Yisrael. And the reason that's important is that Yahowah tells us in Zechariah and Malachi, even in Yirmiyahu, the books of Malachi, Zechariah, and Jeremiah, that he is going to return on the Day of Reconciliations. And that when he returns on the Day of Reconciliations, he is going to reconcile his relationship with Yisrael and with Yahudah. And so he is speaking right now to Yisrael. And he says, after 2 days, he will revive us, and in the third day, he will rise up, establishing us upright, and we will live in his presence. There's 2,000 years between the fulfillment of the means to heal the relationship with Yisrael and Yahowah. The means is the fulfillment of Pesach, Passover, which is the doorway to life, matzah, unyeasted bread, which is the means to our redemption, Bokurim, firstborn children, which is our adoption into Yah's covenant family, and Shavuah, which is the promise of the Shabbat, the seventh day, where we are enriched and empowered as children of God. And so what this is saying is that after 2,000 years after that, that God is going to restore the children of Yisrael and Yahowah, those who are related to Yah. And in the third day, that they're going to be established upright. They're going to live in his presence on the third day. So if you go 2,000 years from the healing, which is occurred on our pagan calendar in 33 CE, year 4000 Yah, to the time that Yisrael and Yahowah and those of us who have embraced the covenant are going to live on the third day for 1,000 years with Yah, you realize that he's speaking of what's going to happen 5 days after his return, where the entire earth is brought back into the conditions experienced in the garden of great joy. And we're going to have a 1,000-year celebration between year 6,000 Yah and 7,000 Yah, beginning with the celebration of Sukkah on a Shabbat in 2033 in our pagan calendars. For a day, 1,000 years, we're going to have the opportunity to live in his presence. He is providing affirmation of his timing and of his plan. So through his prophet Hosea, God has told us that the Torah provides the information which is required for us to know him. As a matter of fact, God tells us in Yirmiyahu that upon his return, since everyone will have either made it their choice to accept, reject, or ignore Yahweh's teaching, that those who survive his return on Yom Kippurim, which will be at sundown on October the 2nd in 2033, it is the celebration of Yom Kippurim in year 6,000 Yah, that he has said on that day, the thing that's going to differentiate his covenant then from his covenant now is that since everyone has made a decision to engage with him based upon the terms and conditions of the covenant, those who survive his return and get to live upright with him in his presence during Sukkah, have all made that decision. We've all chosen to accept God's Torah guidance, that he's going to give us a perfect copy of the Torah. He's going to literally write his Torah inside of us. It's the death knell, of course, of Christianity, because you'd have to be an ignoramus to believe that God replaced his Torah with the gospel of grace only to return to his Torah. Now, during that time, we are all going to benefit from having God's guidance right inside of us. It's now literally part of the fabric of our lives. No one would want to reject it because we've all chosen to accept it. And so God has given us in these words an essential warning, telling us that mankind, as a result of folks like Paul, Akiba, and Muhammad, that they would come to ignore his Torah, effectively executing their own children, sacrificing them to human religious schemes. Then in spite of our ignorance and infidelity, Yahweh promised to do what was required to heal us, curing us and restoring those willing to change their thinking, those willing to turn away from religion. Yosha even told his disciples this as he was explaining the nature of yeast that is removed on matzah to make us perfect. He said the yeast represents political and religious affiliations, political and religious pontifications. And so that is the very thing we're being cured of by the second of the 7 steps that we walk to God. And so he fulfilled each of these promises, the 4 mikre that are designed to deliver the 5 benefits of the covenant, in year 4000 Yah in 33 CE. It was over the course of those 3 days, by fulfilling Passover and unleavened bread, and then being the living embodiment of firstborn child, that Yisrael could stand with God. Equally profound, there is a second aspect of this promise that we should not miss. As you know, most people, especially the adherents to Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, remain oblivious of what the Masayah, which is the implement doing the work of Yah, accomplished on these 3 days. So in particular, the lives of those who comprise Yisrael wouldn't actually be renewed until Yahowah's return on the day of reconciliations. And that would not occur for another 2 days, which speaks of those 2,000 years from 33 CE, 40 Yobel later, which is 2,000 years, to 33 CE, just 20 years away on our pagan calendars. The final fulfillment, then, of this prophecy isn't the year 4000 Yah, 33 CE, but instead 2,000 years after that, in year 6000 Yah, which is 2033. It is only then that Yisrael will be restored to life with Yahowah. So it will be then on the next day, the third day, the next 1,000 years, that Yisrael and Yehudah will be able to stand with and be established by God. In fact, we will actually sing Kumbaya, because that's what it conveys, to with Yah. Ba is the Hebrew word for with and in, so stand with Yah. Hosea 6:1 and 2 therefore declares that the 2 days after God heals mankind, or the 2,000 years from 33 CE, that he would restore those Yehudim and Yisraelites willing to change their attitude towards him. This reconciliation will occur as promised on Yom Kippurim, the day of reconciliations in 2033, and as a result of the beginning of the third day after repairing us, and as a result of what he has done, we will return to the conditions found in the Garden of Eden. We will come home. We will live forever in his presence, which is why Sukkah has an 8th day, a symbol of a new beginning and of infinity and eternity as part of its celebration. God is thereby predicting the 1,000-year celebration of Sukkah between year 6,000 Yah and 7,000 Yah, which will commence on the Shabbat of the called-out assembly of shelters in the fall of 3033. Excuse my cough. Immediately after his glorious return. Collectively, then, these insights, when understood in the context of the whole, are among the most important in the Torah and prophets, especially relative to our salvation and our relationship with Yahowah, especially as it relates to God's prophetic timeline. You don't need to be in the dark. He doesn't want you in the dark. If you want to know where the world is headed, how it's going to conclude, whether or not you will be part of this return to the garden of great joy, all you have to do is explore the text of the testimony that God has provided to us that tell us how we ourselves can know for certain that we will return to the Gan Eden, to the totally satisfying and joyous shelter that is conducive to life, being able to camp out with the creator of the universe, exploring the universe for all eternity. Now, from this perspective, let's consider the passage Yahowah used to describe the renewal of his familial covenant relationship. For this revelation, we must move forward in time to the prophet Yirmiyahu, which means that based upon Yira, which means shelter and dwelling place, and that means that Yirmiyahu spoke of Yahowah's shelter and dwelling place, which is synonymous with what his message was all about, was us paying attention to what he said regarding the renewal of his covenant, so that we were among those restored. Yirma is derived from rum, which means to rise up, And since Yirmiyahu is a compound of these words, rising up to the shelter, dwelling place of Yahowah, we understand the purpose of this prophet's message. It means, literally, Yirmiyahu, to rise up and live in Yahowah's shelter. Now, as we consider God's prophetic prediction regarding the renewal of his covenant, please note that he ties his Bereth covenant relationship to a marriage vow, and that he has spoken specifically in Hosea, salvation, of divorcing Yisrael, which is a marriage vow concept, and that he based his covenant on Adam and Chawah becoming one, becoming husband and wife, mother and father in the Garden of Eden. The message is consistent all the way through. And so when God speaks of restoring the covenant, he's restoring the marriage. It will become monogamous again. And so here is God's statement regarding this. He said, "Behold, days are coming," prophetically declares Yahowah, "when I will cut relationally on behalf of the household and the family," Be'eth, the basis of covenant, which is Bereth, "with the household and family of Yisrael," which is individuals who strive, contend with, engage with, persist with, endure with, are set free and empowered by God. And relationally with the household and family of Yahudah, which means Yah is abundantly sufficient, of Yah, from Yah, those who are related to Yah and those who relate to Yah. A renewed, restored, and reestablished family-oriented covenant relationship. God wants you to be part of it. So let's listen to what he has to say. We'll be back in a moment. Fascinating statement when we examine the words closely and we consider what Yahowah is saying. This statement, of course, is used by Christians to tout their New Testament. They say that God was promising here a New Testament, one with their church, but it doesn't really work that way when you actually examine the words. God is saying that he is going to cut relationally with the household of Yisrael and with the family of Yahudah, this renewed and restoring covenant. And so that would expressly exclude the primarily Gentile church. He didn't say, I was going to cut this with the Gentiles. He said, I'm cutting this with Yisrael and Yahudah. Why? Because he made a promise to Abraham, made a promise to Yishak, made a promise to Jacob that he would restore his relationship with them when they went wayward. And so God is going to honor that promise. And what he is doing is that we notice that Yisrael and Yahudah were torn apart. They were torn apart over the issues of both Assyria and Babylon, the northern kingdom destroyed by the Assyrians, finally the southern kingdom destroyed by the Babylonians. And God's saying, I'm going to resolve that. God also told us in Hosea that he was divorcing himself of Yisrael and that he would divorce himself of Yahudah, although they had a little work still to do before he would be finished with them. But he, in that same text, said, I'm going to restore this relationship. Well, this is his announcement of that relationship being restored. And he used Kadash, which isn't the Hebrew word for new, but renewed and restored. It is a noun expression, or is in this case an adjective based upon a verb. And most Hebrew words, the adjective or the noun is defined by the action form of the word. Kadash as a verb means to renew, to restore, to reaffirm, to repair. This is not a wholly different Testament, as Christians would have you believe, where God left his Torah and replaced it with this gospel of grace. No, this is a restoration of the family covenant relationship, which is brought to you by the Torah. So if you were to stop right there, you would say, all right, so that is God telling us that he's going to have a reaffirmation of his covenant. It's going to be with Yisrael and with Yahudah. Have you seen any evidence that Yisrael and Yahowah are restored back into a relationship with Yahweh? Do you see any place where Yahowah and Yisrael are standing up, reaching up, calling God by his name as Yahweh? Do you see them touting the joy of being reunited and reaffirmed in the covenant? No. And because of that, that means that the covenant has not yet been renewed, which means there cannot be a New Testament. It's still in our future. This is going to occur. In year 6000 Yah, on Yom Kippurim, the Day of Reconciliations, in 2033. He said, it will not be exactly the same, identical to the covenant which relationally I cut with their fathers in the day when, firmly grasping me, in their hands I led them out of the realm of the crucible of Egypt, which relationally they broke, disassociating themselves from my family-oriented covenant relationship, though I was married to them, prophetically declares Yahweh. God is reaffirming that the covenant is a marriage vow. He has told us that Yisrael broke their vow, was unfaithful, and therefore God divorced himself of them. But he says right here, I'm going to restore that relationship, which he has every right to do, and is going to do because of who he is. He tells us that this covenant was initially manifest before our eyes when the children of Yisrael, firmly grasping the Heavenly Father by the hand, were led away from the crucible of Egypt, which is a metaphor for human religious, political, economic, and military oppression. That's what God led them away from and into the promised land. And so that is telling us that there's going to be a difference between that covenant and this reaffirmation of the covenant. And that has caused Christians to say, stopping there, that means that their gospel of grace is the replacement. But God doesn't allow that conclusion. And what he says is the antithesis of that, for he tells us that indeed, with this familial covenant relationship, which relationally I will cut with the house of Yisrael after those days, prophetically declares Yahweh, I will actually give my Torah, completely providing and producing my teaching and instructions within their inner nature. And upon their heart I will actually write it, and they shall be for me as my children, and I shall be for them God.